Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Zelzel Marchand, and I'm running for HD35 Oregon State House of Representatives, Democrat. And I'm running because I often say the West Side is the best side, even though obviously I'm here on the East Side. And I've been in Oregon for about 40 years. I've raised my son here. I love the diversity that the West Side has. It's over 45% of color, a lot of LGBTQ folks. We've got great, wildlife. We've got, city life, all of those things. But even though we have that, we're facing a lot of job and housing insecurity. I've chosen to, grow my business and raise my son there, and I have the lived experience and professional experience to make that happen. And to give an idea of the demographics of HD35, it is about, I would say about 70% unincorporated Aloha, 23% Beaverton. There's a little sliver of South Hillsborough, which isn't completely populated yet. So,
how do you make your living?
How do I make my living? I am an artistic director at a theater company that I founded kind of the beginning of the pandemic. It's TNA Grand Theater, and in that is a program called 10 Tiny Talks, and it's a global program that serves Black and Indigenous, trans, and queer folks around the world. So every year we have 10 people or projects in the program. We give them total support, we pay them, we give them mentorship, production, videography, and we put them in front of other creative institutions that are ready and willing to see their work and get them sustained as artists. So,
have you run for office before?
No, I have not.
Okay, great. All right, Farah?
I'm Farah Chaichi. I am also a Democrat running for House District 35. I am a lifelong Beavertonian. My parents met at the University of Portland. My dad was here from Iran, and then the revolution happened, so I call him an unintentional immigrant. And my mom was from the Dalles. And when I went to school in Beaverton, I joined Amnesty International, where I learned about all kinds of human rights abuses across the world. But when I went off to college, I sort of zeroed in on criminal justice and political science because I wanted to be a public defender that abolished the death penalty, and I figured those two areas of study would help me with that. When I got out of undergrad, undertaking all that student loan debt to be a lawyer just did not appeal to me, so I got whatever job I could, and around 2014 got involved in local politics because I needed to do something I cared about. I was appointed to the City of Beaverton's Human Rights Advisory Commission. I started showing up for city council meetings and testifying even when my voice shook, which took a long time to get over, and realizing that our city council wasn't going to reflect my values, so I started showing up for candidates to get them elected who better reflected my values. I also joined the Wasco Dems and the Oregon League of Conservation Voters Endorsement Committee for Washington County. And so a lot of people would say this is a natural next step to run, but honestly, I'm kind of surprised that I'm doing this. I was asked by the incumbent Wednesday Campos to think about it, and I realized I could be a voice for the people, and if somebody that I respect in the job is saying, I think you can do this too, I'm going to take that seriously, especially because, as was mentioned, our district is super diverse. We are probably the most diverse district or second most diverse district. I can't remember where that data is, but I've been told that more than once. And as a young working class woman of color, I want those experiences reflected in the legislature. So if I want those experiences reflected in the legislature, why am I waiting for somebody else to do it?
And how do you make your living? Not that how one makes their living is dispositive, but it's just an interesting part of your biography.
Yeah.
I work in an administrative department at Stoll Reeves. So I'm not practicing law, I'm supporting people who are practicing law.
And what does that entail?
We do conflict requests, so people have to tell us which parties are involved in those matters, and we have to run them through the database, and then that gets analyzed to make sure we don't have conflicts of interest. And then our department also does ethical screenings and opens clients and matters.
How long have you been at Stoll Reeves?
Since 2014. So
and has that
years.
Made you wish that you had gone to law school, or made you glad you didn't?
I mean, that debt is still insurmountable, so I think the state of criminal justice right now makes me wish I had gone into it, but that debt is just, I don't know how you get over it and serve the people.
So a lot of people are called to politics because of an issue or a burning injustice or something they want to accomplish. So we'd like each of you to tell us what the issue, the specific issue that animates your interest in this seat is. Start with you this time. Farah.
Well, my platform is human rights, and that's pretty broad. So to narrow it down, housing is a huge issue. We have a huge homelessness issue, and healthcare and habitable planet. Those are my top 3 priorities.
What do you think you could do as a legislator on the first issue, housing and homelessness?
First, I think we need to get the real right to rest passed, which Representative Campos had introduced. It stops the harm that is done to people with what are, I hate the word, but sweeps, like we're sweeping them. It implies that people are trash to be discarded, and but I haven't thought of a better word than sweeps, except maybe forcible removal. So every time we forcibly remove people from a place, it makes it harder for them to get out of homelessness. So we need to stop that harm. And then the legislature can implement lower rent control. Like, it's at 7% right now, plus inflation. So if inflation is 7% and they can raise it 7%, that's 14. But who got 14% raises last year, you know?
Okay. Z, how about you?
Could you repeat the question?
What is the animating issue that that
Gotcha.
really drives you to Salem?
Running for the legislature is something that I have wanted to do. I think that's a part of the Black experience because we inherit a struggle. For me, it was deciding through the pandemic to not be currency anymore. I was balancing forensic support and caregiving, and we didn't get a lot of that support. And I wondered why I was waiting for my life to happen and for the life of the people I care about to happen. Being a small business owner, I have the freedom to continue to be available to my community as I have been for several years, working in different platforms. So I decided now was the time. It seemed perfect, and I'm in a very privileged position as a Black native trans guy to do that. Not everyone in my world has the energy for that, and I've gotten a lot of support. So if not now, when? And if not who, why not me? So.
Is there a legislator in the state house or senate that you identify with most or align with the most in terms of values?
Oh, that's a really great question. And a tricky one too, because we're all human beings, right? And it's really difficult to navigate human rights through a legislature when we're also just dealing with human nature. But I've gotten the support of Akasha Lord Spence, and a host of other individuals, Travis Nelson. I identify with them. I also voted for Whimsy. I think she's incredible. She paved a way for diversity in our district, and I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. And same question for any legislators that you align with most in terms of your policies or values.
Not surprisingly, I would say Winsme Campos. She's just been bold and not taking the status quo as a given. I really appreciate that about her.
So as a legislator, you will be asked or forced to digest massive amounts of information and quickly make hard decisions, and sometimes you'll have to make decisions that disappoint people you care about or people who supported you. So could you each give us an example of a hard decision that you have had to make that was consequential in your life? Start with you, Farah. It doesn't have to have been political. I mean, something, something where you faced a very difficult choice, and you.
Well, I think the last 2 years navigating COVID has been that every single day, especially because it's not just your health that you're taking into account, it's other people's health. So we lost my mom last May to COVID, mm-hmm. and my father was vaccinated and he didn't get it, but he's got, he's a little bit more vulnerable to disease. So I didn't see my mom for the year before she died while we were in the pandemic, and that was to keep them safe, you know? And that was in their best interest, her and my dad, to keep them safe, but that was still an extremely hard decision. And how do you balance keeping people healthy and, you know, your relationships with them? And I'm still doing that with my father now, because as you can see, I'm out going places and I'm triple vaxxed, and so is he, or maybe 4 at this point. But it's still a possibility that you can pass it on. And so just being careful with other people's health, I think, has been really difficult to navigate.
Okay. See, what about you? It's a hard decision.
That is a hard decision. I was thinking furiously while Farah was answering. For me, the pandemic has been going on for 3 years. I was, as I mentioned, a caregiver, and the state told support services that there was a natural disaster coming and it wasn't prepared for that, and that we should talk to our families, and that was really disconcerting. And we are already an underserved community, and we did not get the correct support, whether it was PPE or other things. Deciding to leave caregiving and following what I knew I needed to do was a hard decision, because I was one less healthcare worker in COVID. And so that was a very hard decision. Running is a hard decision. It's a family affair. You know, having survived COVID, the Black and Native communities were hit the most, and we are still being hit the most. I'm immunocompromised. That was a conversation we had, how to navigate a campaign while being compromised. All these things have been very difficult. I think we must have lost 10 people that I know of in my immediate family and friendship circle, due to not having proper resources in the community. So it's something that has torn through our lives. So all these things are hard.
Are there any specific ways that the legislature should have handled COVID better in the last 2 years? Like, is there a specific bill that they should have passed that they didn't, or a specific policy that needed to be implemented?
Yeah, so, and here I just want to preface that I'm not on the House floor, so I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs of disaster preparedness, but I know that a responsible state and country earmarks that, and we've been speaking as underserved communities for decades about how we need resources. That's been an issue in America overall. Whether it's climate change or this pandemic, this country knew that we would be facing challenges like this, and Oregon itself has never dedicated itself to infrastructure, and that's one of my main passions and concerns. So yes, it absolutely should have been more prepared to support situations like these, and we should be quick to make a plan going forward.
And Farah, similar question to you, since healthcare is one of your main priorities. Was there any specific bill that you wish you would have seen passed during the pandemic?
Several. I think that like at least 8% of Oregonians were still uninsured during the pandemic or currently, and opening OHP for all could have helped during that. But I also think that making people whole who lost their jobs should have been a bigger priority, and making sure that we are compensating essential workers as if they were essential. It's like Schrodinger's economy. You are both essential but not essential enough to pay and treat with respect as if you were essential, and I think that was a missed opportunity. I don't think it's the legislature's domain anymore, but also the failed unemployment system, which I feel like I heard had money 10 years ago to upgrade. Like, that should have never been a problem.
So you're obviously both running in a Democratic primary, and Democrats have a supermajority. There's a good chance they'll hold on to it. But one of the things that we look for in candidates is an ability to think independently. So I'm wondering if you could each offer us an example of a way in which you are not just a cookie cutter Democrat who will go down there and vote exactly along sort of and there's nothing wrong with the Democratic platform, but how you have sort of in your own life figured out a place where you may disagree with members of your party. So we'll start with you.
I like how you phrased that and made it sound smooth. How are you gonna make your fellow Democrats mad or not? You decide. How much of an upstart are you? I will say, it is a trick question because we're Democrats in a primary. We all want to get along, but I get what you're saying. So, I think how I can speak to your question and answer it is, for example, like Farah and I have a lot in common. For instance, pro-workers, pro-unions, all-inclusive healthcare, all that stuff. In all of these machinations that hopefully continue to help us get our needs met, I firmly believe in human rights and civil rights, and I believe in respect and human decency. And while we have all these really difficult talks to repair the damage that's been done and look to the future, regardless of whether I'm in a progressive camp or not, if somebody is invalidating a human experience or existence, then I will stand up to that. And I can imagine as we have these really intimate, difficult conversations around healthcare, unions, human representation, that might ruffle some feathers, especially for those who've never met somebody like me. But I'm prepared for that.
Okay. Farah, how about you?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer this other than I was an activist for a really long time, which often put me at odds with the Democratic Party. So I haven't been afraid to say when something is wrong. There was a resolution that several counties passed, Democratic Party, counties, Democratic parties, so many plurals, about the sexual harassment issue in the legislature, calling for Peter Courtney not to be elected again. I drafted that, and it originally included Tina Kotek because as the co-chairs of the personnel committee, the buck stops with them. And I understand that it's not popular to go after your leadership, but when they've done something wrong, you can't not say something just because they're the ones in charge.
So you were part of, I think, did you and I speak at that time? Because I was speaking to a lot of people about that issue.
I think I spoke to Hannah.
Okay.
I don't think you and I spoke.
Okay. So that was an example of you standing up. Okay. Did you take any heat for that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wasn't in a position of power, so they couldn't retaliate, but people weren't happy about it, and I'm sure that it sticks in their mind as just a little memory, Yeah.
So both of you have a long list of impressive endorsers, names that we know of individuals and of organizations. Point us to one that is particularly significant. If voters in your district only knew one endorsement that was going to convince them that you're the candidate.
You're trying to start a fight, aren't you?
That's your favorite.
Who is, which endorsement would you point to? Which of your children do you love more than all the others? Farah, will start with you.
Oh, thank God.
Well, I mean, I'd have to say Wednesday. She is a rising star who's made a very good impression with a lot of people and is the person I feel like I most closely aligned with. And just from a strategic point too, as the incumbent, people know her name.
Okay. See, how about you?
This is so unfair. Because my run is historic, that means I'm a first, just like Katanji. So it's extra hard for you to ask me choose one organization or person who got you here, because that really is unfair. I'll point out I'm the only Democratic candidate that has the backing of pro-choice, Planned Parenthood, and Basic Rights Oregon, and together we have changed the lives of humans here in Oregon. If I had to choose one, I guess I would say pro-choice, because Roe versus Wade is tied to houselessness because of a lack of medical services. They've made a safe place for trans LGBTQ people. Our families, it's not just an LGBTQ issue. When people need healthcare, they go to these clinics. It's about so much more than my life or the life of my family. So I hope Roe doesn't hate me, but I'm choosing pro-choice in this interview to answer your question.
Well, and the point is not to say that there's anything wrong with any of your endorsements.
Of course not.
Just,
Of course not. We would never be insinuating.
We have two good candidates here. We're trying to distinguish between.
Of course.
So to that end, we'd like to ask you each to ask your opponent a question, which would be a question and not a statement. And it should be ideally a question that will draw a distinction between the two of you as candidates. And so the purpose of this is to illustrate or illuminate something in this race that we may not be aware of that you are, or something you think is important. So I've given you a little bit extra time by filibustering here. So I think, Z, I'm going to call on you first, since you've got a journalism background.
I do.
Ready to go with the questions.
You know, I tried to find out whether you were doing this interview. I'm like, I know Nigel. I hope he's doing it, but want him to be good too. But yeah,
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
I know. This has been great. I'm not gonna go for the juggler because I reserve that for when it really matters. But I know you have a criminal justice background, and that matters to me. And I know the cost of a law degree, because in journalism we get that too. Don't you want to go and then get a law degree? Or don't you want to get a master's or PhD in that? How are you going to employ that knowledge for my community overall, especially when it comes to housing, because of who's on the streets, and would you re-up and go to law? How are you going to use that criminal justice? Because I know very well that when you go into those schools, it's very police heavy. It sounds good on paper, but I consider it too going into forensics. But what does that mean for you? Because they really take students and they really intend to make you into police force or to serve in that way, even though there might be some social justice intersections there.
Well, I was really lucky. Maybe lucky is the wrong word. I was privileged enough to go to a Jesuit institution, and they had a super social justice lens.
Well, which one?
Seattle University.
Oh, I went to undergrad there.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and I say lucky because I didn't really look into which denomination was that gave me the most scholarship money. That's why I went there. But they did not focus so much on enforcement if you didn't go that route, I did the general criminology where you study the causes and reasons behind it, and I think that plays into how we should be approaching these issues in the legislature, because if you understand that the root cause of crime is not because people are inherently evil, it's because of the situation that they're in, to be focusing your legislation on the root causes, which is what I want to do when I get there. And it's been so long since I was in school also. I don't expect to be a subject matter expert on this. I don't think an undergraduate degree would even qualify as being a subject matter expert. So I'm going to be listening to the people who are experiencing the injustices and the organizations that are working on those issues, like the OJCR, is that the right acronym? The ones who are pushing for that class action suit for prisoners.
OJRC. Yeah.
Yeah, alphabet soup.
It is, yeah.
So that's what I would hope to bring to the legislature.
That's cool. I didn't know the Jesuit school was hanging out up there. I didn't know.
Modern, it's what you're saying, where they're not very dogmatic about the religious stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Farah, would you like to ask your opponent a question?
I know she does, so.
I guess, what would your signature piece of legislation that you want to champion be?
Ooh, that's really difficult. I would probably continue my work in housing with, that's a really big issue in my community. And I grew up houseless and in poverty in the welfare system, and we had slightly more programming in the 80s than we do today. My mom worked through Jobs Plus and went into government administrative work and raised 2 kids. And there is a lot of trans folks, vets, people with mental health challenges on the streets. And I've worked with, in the Tri-County area to help get 2100 passed, which gave us more procurement say, that allowed more nonprofits to throw their hat into the ring for that. It seems small, and I don't expect everyone to know what that is, but before it was just like 30 government organizations that primarily got chosen to do that. So then that allowed data wonks like me to come in and say, here's the data that is missing because we're not included as LGBTQ folks in this housing data, and to support measures that support wraparound services. So if I had to choose one, it would probably continue in that track because we sorely need that infrastructure.
That's, sorry, House Bill 2100?
Yes. I mean, that's already done. It would support more housing. To be clear.
And in terms of like, if there was this piece of legislation, what specific details would it have for the LGBTQ community in terms of housing? I know it's hypothetical right now, but.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, there would not need to be an extra clause because human rights are for everyone. There should be thoughtful policy involved in that. Like a big topic right now is that they're not these, programs and shelters, both long and short term, are not safe for trans folks. And there's still an educational component that's happening there. And nobody typically wants to stay in a shelter. That's why they choose to stay in a tent instead, because you're just surrounded by people all the time. So, to try to answer your question about how like LGBTQ people specifically in housing would just be to make sure that we are safe in housing in general. That's another reason why we just are not, people are not feeling like they can go to those shelters just like anybody else. It would just be making it clear that this is for everyone. But to speak more to that, for instance, the measures that are happening, like the People for Portland measure, talks about sustainable housing on the west side. We need something that is not moving people from temporary shelter to temporary shelter. And when we are creating these programs and investing in these buildings, we need to include LGBTQ support systems in there, whether it's DEI compassion training, hiring trans folks in that. That's specifically what that looks like to get that to be successful.
We're almost out of time, so I want to ask you both, since you are both strong candidates with strong lists of supporters, to just take 30 seconds and tell us why you are the right choice for us to make in this race. Farah, your turn first.
I've been showing up for the last 8 years in Beaverton and Washington County to advocate for what people need, and I want to continue that in the state legislature. I think that the endorsement of Mayor Lacey Beatty, who's really gotten a lot of work done on the ground, means a lot because she shows up and does the work, and I do the same. I show up and do the work and when I'm not in charge. So I think that I would continue to show up and fight hard for what's right, even if it's going to maybe make some people uncomfortable.
Sauce?
Washington County has never had a black legislator. Our district, for as diverse as it is, has never had a black or native legislator. And Oregon has never had a transgender voice at the legislature. My voice is missing from the House of Representatives, and my lived experience and my professional experience and the actual policy shaping and supporting bills that are for everyone speak to that. And I believe that everyone deserves to have their needs met, and HD 35 is primarily an incorporated, and we do not have the same support systems as Hillsborough or Beaverton. Because of that, we don't pay the same taxes. We don't have access to the same programs. We sorely need infrastructure almost more than anybody else in that district. And that's my home.
Great. So we have one question every cycle that is an attempt to try and illuminate a different aspect of the candidates. And sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's funny. This time it's COVID. We want to know what moment or event for you sort of signaled that the worst of COVID was over. So we've got a colleague who loves to go to basketball games, and for a year and a half he couldn't go, and then finally he got to go to a Blazers game, and he thought, oh, okay, it's finally getting back to normal. So that's an example of what we're looking for. If there was, and maybe that it hasn't happened yet, because I know both of you have different experiences, but has there been a time when you said, okay, life is getting somewhere close to back to normal? Z, for you first, please.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned before, I was a healthcare worker and then journalism in it. So the pandemic's been going on for a long time, and I have a very different perspective given my lived and professional experience. That said, the residency that I direct and oversee, which is very joyful, we will be able to have in-person performances, which we severely limited last year, and that is incredibly, I'm ecstatic to be looking forward to that and to have people in audiences again.
When is that going to happen?
The submissions just closed, and the season opens in May, and it runs through October.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's coming up soon.
Yeah.
Farah, for you?
I don't know that anything has signaled that it's exactly over.
Right.
It's going to be endemic, so it really won't be over. But I guess the point at which I decided, I guess I'm going to try to live my life, is when my partner and I went to Florida to visit family for the first time there. I'd never met their family. And I got on a plane with a solid mask or whatever, which I thought was terrifying, but it's like, well, do this or live at home for the rest of your life seeing no one.
When was that?
It was Christmas time.
Okay.
Where in Florida? I'm just curious.
North Central.
Oh, okay. I've just spent time in Miami, so never been up further north than that.
Dun Ellen, which I'd never heard of before.
Thank you. Just factually, we're done, Brian. Just factually, so